welcome back to the HeySue Podcast. As those of you who've been listening know, we've turned our attention to sellers who sell in interesting ways or founders who've grown their business in ways that comport with some of the stuff I care about as a selling strategy. All that is wrapped up in a book that comes out on September 9th, 2025, called Never Ask for the Sale. Supercharge your business with the power of passionate ambivalence. And so I'm welcoming CEOs or heads of sales who consciously or just because they're doing their own thing, embody strategies that I think are consistent with passionate ambivalence. If you want to take a deeper look at the book, please go buy it. Pre-order it or order it if it's after September 9th, 2025. You can visit www.heysue.com/book and find all the links you need to the hardback book, the ebook, and the audiobook. And for those of you new to this podcast, if you'd rather listen and see this podcast, please go to the HeySue channel on YouTube and you'll get a full audio and visual experience. For now, without further ado, I want to welcome one of my favorite founders and CEOs, Ian MacGregor. Ian is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Skratch Labs. That is SKRATCH Labs. And I'm going to let Ian define exactly what this company is in his own words. But if you're an athlete, you are probably very familiar with Skratch. And if you are a Whole Foods shopper, you are definitely familiar with seeing these packages of electrolyte product for athletes all over all of the Whole Foods stores, certainly in North America. Please join me in welcoming Ian MacGregor. Hi, Ian. It's great to see you.
Yeah, Sue, thanks for making time and making this happen.
I'm so glad you said yes. So I just explained what my interpretation is of what Skratch Labs is, but I think it's better if you explain it. So, in a sentence or two.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, at its simplest, it's a sports nutrition company. But I think we've always taken an approach that it's never that simple.
Okay, I did pretty well then. I also got in some of your distribution channels. I did a pretty good plug, I think. I'm not feeling too badly about that. Okay, tell us a little bit about the founding of Skratch.
Yeah, I mean, Scratch came out of the world of pro cycling, and my business partner Alan and I were both fortunate enough to come from that, that industry, that space, where we had separate but overlapping careers. So I was a cyclist, and in many ways, I would describe myself. I was on the team, but I was also one of those guys that year after year was just like hoping and praying I was going to get another contract. I certainly wasn't making huge dollars or winning stages at the Tour de France. And then Alan was the sports science director for a handful of different teams. And for a period of time, I was one of the racers on one of the teams that he worked for. And, the really important thing about that is that Alan's job was to help us go faster. And so often people think about that as, these like marginal gains, right? Lighter wheels, lighter this, X number of milligrams of some amino acid that'll change everything. And well, I think that stuff has a place. I can tell you what he found and what I found back then, and certainly what we've helped our customers now through Scratch with, which is it's actually a lot of times about these bottlenecks. It's less about specific micronutrients and more about the meal you have and even the context of where you have that meal that really leads to better recovery.
Ian, how did you decide who would be the CEO of your company?
Funny question. We certainly didn't decide. In fact, I know when we started the business, and we had a third co-founder named Aaron Foster, and it just happened. I think none of us were that worried about those things, which maybe was a good thing. But I think we also fell into our roles and where we had maybe natural skills. And oftentimes those natural skills have, pros and cons, right? Double-edged swords. So it just kind of happened. I will say this though, I think I was 27 when I took, this quote unquote title of CEO. And I think I certainly had imposter syndrome. Without a doubt, I wasn't ready for it. But I also knew at the time that that meant I was going to have to learn and learn at least as fast as the business was growing. And gosh, 14 years later, that hasn't changed.
I imagine. Ian, you know that part of the context for this conversation for me is how to think about selling and growing a business. And one of the reasons I thought that I wanted to talk to you is I have seen you so many times, including really recently. You and I don't know that we're friends, but we're like email friends. Every now and then we email each other, and it feels like a really nourishing relationship to me. And recently I wrote you a note and I said, I'm seeing all this liquid IV and I'm seeing all these other companies come out and they're at Costco and they're marketing to me. And you know that I have a bike, but am certainly nothing like a real athlete in the world that you live in. And and I said, gosh, are you interested in that? Because I'm bummed out that I see you guys everywhere, but I wasn't seeing you in these kinds of channels that were more generic. And your response, of course, I knew what your response was going to be because it's so you. But can you just say what your response was to that?
I don't know that I remember exactly, so I'm answering it again afresh. And you can
Okay,
call
great.
bullshit if I'm incongruent
Super
here.
authentic.
But I think the reality was it's like that's awesome for them, but that's not where our real customer is, and that's okay.
Yeah. So this book talks about this concept I call passionate ambivalence. And the notion is that you can be super passionate about the thing that you're doing or the thing or the whatever thing, service, whatever being
Yeah.
you are selling. And you can be unattached about whether other people buy it or any specific person or customer buys it. And when I heard you answer that question that way, which is exactly how you answered it, I thought this is such a good example. Like you're not hungry for market expansion at the expense of values or at the expense of mission. And I just wonder, that must have been true about you for the last 14 years. And are there any other places where you've had forks in the road where you've made a decision like this?
Um, Man, there's a few questions sort of, rolled up in there. But going back first, no, we haven't, I think, always been that way for the past 14 years. And I think that that's okay too, right? I think that some of those learnings along the way are part of the process. If I go all the way back and maybe connect the dots here, I'll tell you one common thing that Alan and I learned, and I'll drag him under the bus with me on this one. In pro sports, everything is centered around the finish line, right? And the achievement and the winning or the not winning. And when I get there, everything will be great and I'll be fulfilled. And that is an absolute load of bullshit. I certainly won some races. I certainly lost a lot more than I won. Um, I had teammates who, won Olympic medals, who stood on the podium at Grand Tours, and none of that drove fulfillment. And I think that one thing that we being Alan and I have tried to bring to business, which is frankly just another game, um, is this real belief that it has to be more than just that finish line. And we haven't always been perfect. Like I said, we haven't we don't have a perfect track record over the past 14 years, but it is certainly something that I believe. And I think something that come back to and been grounded by over the past 14 years. And then one more irony that I want to bring, not to go too deep on this question, but the reason our business exists is because Alan started making his own solutions to products back in 2006, 7, and 8, because this World Tour cycling team was sponsored by a company that was more interested in growing its market share than it was in solving a problem for elite athletes. And had they been focused or stayed focused, because there was a time when they were, on that core athletic consumer, our business never would have come to fruition because we never would have had a problem to solve. And I think that while I do hope that Skratch can grow and we have a big vision and we do want to help more people, we're unwilling to leave that core customer behind.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. That's a really formative anti-lesson for you to hold on to as motivation. That makes sense to me. Is there one place where you think you violated this guidance? You mentioned that there were a few. Are you willing to share one?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, and I don't know that I have the time frames all perfect off the top of my head, but there was a time where we definitely saw some of the more traditional and grocery channels as a pipeline. And the reality is our customers do shop at those places. And we went into Target for a handful of years, and we weren't unsuccessful, but we certainly weren't growing. And I think what we found in that was one, we weren't selling to new people. But instead, what we were doing was we were sort of surprising our existing customers when they found us there. And frankly, that's not a great experience for anybody. And it also sort of undermines and undercuts some of the other places where we do have the opportunity to find new customers. I think about, climbing gyms or outdoor retailers like REI, or frankly, even a retailer like Whole Foods, where things are different and the shopping behavior matches better.
Yeah. So you're not leaving Whole Foods anytime soon.
No, I think that's a great example of a place where, we have found a good consumer fit and both can serve our existing customers, right, in terms of their patterns, but we certainly find new customers there as well.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Um, when you think about your own skills as a salesperson, what arises for you?
Um, I think I'm a pretty bad salesperson.
Huh.
And maybe it actually fits with, the theme of your book, right? And that I think in many ways, I'm not interested in convincing somebody. I'm not interested in selling somebody. It's like we've got a solution. We think that it's the best solution we've seen. I can also tell you that our own solutions have evolved and iterated and gotten better over time. So I'm not going to say it's the end all be all solution. And if somebody's not interested in it or not into it, I'm not going to convince them. Even with my friends, like I don't argue with them. I don't try and over even educate them about some things. I just think that in some ways that's a waste of time. Or maybe I'm just tired and there's other things to do in life that's not where I choose to put my energy. But yeah, I don't know. I've never wanted to trick people into something. Instead, I think we have a lot of belief that if people try, our products or use one of our cookbooks or visit our restaurant or these other places where they can interact with us, that the proof is in the pudding. And that it'll work out.
Yeah, I mean, that really is core to the belief of me as
Yeah.
articulated in this book, which is that if you have that kind of alignment with your own personal truth and it's authentic and you adhere to it and what you're putting out in the world is great. And over 14 years, I'm sure there were early signs that it was great at the beginning.
Mhm.
One of the things I always talk to people about is like, if people are drawn to you as a personal service provider or drawn to your product, you have expansion potential. So,
Yeah.
this book really is about selling without selling, which is
Mhm.
something I routinely see you do. And it's exactly what you're articulating. I think you have often had, maybe you still do, but I have met one or two people who are senior in marketing and sales at your company.
Mhm.
Uh, what do they do compared to what you do?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've got a sales team, right? And there's a dozen people who are out there selling. But I think, no, I don't think, I know this. I think that they're still selling in maybe a different way. I mean, first and foremost, we've got a blanket guarantee. And, we guarantee that our products work. And if they don't, we'll help you find something that does, or we'll refund your money. The end. And we're not asking for receipts. We're not questioning or challenging. And sometimes every once in a while, somebody takes advantage and good for them. Like it doesn't matter. Like that's not what we're here for. Um, at the same time, I think that what we've seen, and we think about like what's happened in consumer goods, broadly speaking, over the last 7, 8 years, right? There was this sort of like growth hacking rage, where it's like I can spend $60 to buy a customer through Meta or Amazon or whatever, and the first time they buy on average, it's $80, and therefore I make money profitably. Like that's all fine and good, and there's certainly been some amazing success stories of businesses that have grown out of that. But I think there's been hundreds, right, for everyone that was successful that collapsed back on themselves because they didn't actually solve a problem. There wasn't actually resonance with the consumer and there wasn't value. And I think in many ways, for better or for worse, we've done the opposite, right? Which was we never looked for those growth hacks. Instead, we looked for ways to grow organically, to build real relationships with people and give them an excuse to tell their friends. And instead of, having some hockey stick or some crazy growth where you hit a ceiling and explode and get back to it or whatever it may look like, ours has been incredibly steady, or I would maybe say, it's been like a skate ramp, right? Like ever increasing slowly over time, right? It's one of those overnight successes that takes, a dozen years.
Yeah, exactly. Those are great stories. So when I think about you in the universe, uh, one thing that arises is you just, I don't know, 2 months ago, a month ago, you posted something on LinkedIn. You were looking at it for a couple of exercises to do with your team at an offsite.
Yeah.
And you got so much input. I mean, you really, I mean, including from a number of people who do this for a living, you just got a bunch of input. And I wonder why you think that happened. And there's a reason that I ask. I mean, part of my thinking about selling or growing a business is about just adding a bunch of good stuff into the universe. And maybe, this give first mentality that Brad Feld has just written about, maybe it comes back to you, maybe it doesn't. But I wonder how you think, like, why did that happen that way?
Um, Gosh, funny question. I haven't thought about it. I certainly I don't know why it happened that way. And I can't control that part of it, right? Um, what I will say and why I asked is that I am always surprised, and again, this is probably because the only job I've ever had was in pro sports, at how collaborative and supportive the business community is. And I'm fascinated by it. And I really love it. And, you know, when there are opportunities to sort of come at something with an open mind, um, I don't know. I try to take advantage of them, and I like running little experiments. Our CFO at Scratch asked me like, why? Actually, that exact thing. Why did I post that? And like, I didn't have a great reason. Like, I just saw it as a little experiment. Right? The cost was relatively small. Take the time to write something, try and make it legible. I knew at the beginning that if I got a response, I was going to take the time to recap it so that other people could have that information, and other people might be nobody. Right? Let's not think too highly of ourselves. It might be a few dozen, I don't know, but I signed up for that, and that's it. And other than that, we'll see what happens. Um, and I'll say there's some really good things that came out of that, and I certainly learned from it. And that's really nice.
Okay. Well, just for a moment, just so people can really learn something about you and about how this can work, because you're not playing small ball over there. Like, you have an office, you opened a restaurant on Pearl Street. Like, you guys aren't, you're out of the garage. For like, your office still feels a little like a garage, but it's a really gigantic garage. Um,
Yeah, for a
so
40,000 square foot garage.
yeah, exactly. It's a really nice garage. But I want to push you a little on this. Like,
Yeah,
I don't, I sort of, what I heard in that is like the aw shucks, people are just kind. And I actually think that's true. People are kind.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
also think there's part of you in why that happens around you. So can you be a little more on the edge about what you do to generate that kind of goodwill?
Um, I'm not trying to defer or be soft about giving you a fake or, overly humble or whatever you want to call it, BS answer. But
Yeah.
I'll tell you what comes up for me. When people ask for help, I say yes.
Yeah.
And there certainly has been a few times over the past 15 years where I felt burned and I got angry because I felt like I helped and supported somebody and then they came in and competed or they came in and stepped on my toes or that has happened. But gosh, out of what is probably hard to estimate numbers as a human, right? Our brains aren't great at that. But I mean, certainly out of hundreds of interactions and asks, there's probably only ever been two or three that I was like, ah, fuck you, the rest of them were enormously positive. And again, compared to sport where your teammates are often competing against you for that last roster spot, I just see that as positive. And I'm not perfect, but I try to not focus on those, two or three that feel like you got burned and instead recognize the energy that I get from helping somebody, but also appreciation for the help that we've got over the years, which I think is where you and I first met, right? Many, many years ago. So I don't know. I mean, it's cliche, but it's just that idea of pay it forward.
Yeah. So I just alluded to your office. And I think, when did you open that? 5, 6 years ago?
Uh, I know that we moved kind of in the midst of COVID
Okay.
because our, distribution changed and D2C exploded and wholesale went down, all that happened. And I remember the chaos of it. So I think probably 2020 is when we opened. I think you're referring to our office and warehouse is probably what you're thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah. Yeah.
black building
Yep.
in
Yep.
Boulder. Um,
Yep. It's too small now. Got to find a new place. So,
are you
uh, or,
serious?
or if anybody knows the landlord and they want to sell us the building, that'd be great.
So this is another thing about you. Like, I just want to, I don't know. I mean, frankly, I have such a kinship for people like you who And this is, you and I both live in Boulder, and this is one thing I love about Boulder is that generally the bikes cost more than the cars, and there's zero way, you can go to Frasca, just named James Beard best restaurant in the world again, and everybody's wearing fleeces and, whatever, Tivas. So, I mean, I love that about you just never know who's worth $1 zillion and who is, you just have no idea. So I like that. And like, how do you decide to make your 40,000 square foot investment?
Yeah, I'll tell you a belief that I have, and I say a belief because I can't tell you with absolute certainty, and the numbers I can't make a mathematical argument for this one. But I believe that the fulfillment process and the things we can uniquely do by running our own warehouse are part of how we build that flywheel and customer value. And that even with robots, which we don't have, you can't run a warehouse without people, and that people matter, and that the culture matters. And I don't want a culture where the warehouse is separate and is out by the airport and the company, right, are the people who do the other jobs, because that type of separation it just isn't going to work. It doesn't fit our values. It doesn't fit the vision we have. And so we make a choice, and we make a choice to run a warehouse in Boulder, Colorado, which means we have to pay people more, which means we pay through the roof when it comes to rent. But in my mind, that's not an investment in altruism. It's an investment in customer experience. And again, I can't build an argument that you couldn't challenge, right? But it's a belief that we've established and we've run with it.
Yeah, well, and you need a new office. So obviously it's working, office and warehouse. What are the kinds of things that you do to increase customer connection because you run the warehouse?
Yeah, I mean, there are some simple things here. One is, and we get this, I think, at least a few times a week, if not every day. Uh, you know, Husband calls up and says, "Hey, my wife, I just found out she placed an order and she forgot to include my favorite flavor of bars. Can you help me out?" And in this situation, unlike with a 3PL, a third party warehouse, our team says, "Absolutely. Let me walk back there and find your order. And hey, we put those, cherry pistachio energy bars in there. And don't worry about it. We got you this time." And here's the bet that we're making. The bet that we're making is that by giving them that product, by taking that time, blah, 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 that we just did a whole lot better in terms of creating a sticky connection with that customer than any, $60 amount of Instagram or meta ads or whatever you'd be doing, right? In terms of lifetime value, blah, blah, blah. That's the bet. And we've been making that bet, since the beginning. There are other things that we can do that, do scale. They're challenging, right? We continue to include notes and signed cards and appreciation in orders.
I
And those
notice.
things, they're not
I've
easy,
received
right?
them.
Yeah, yeah. And, if we're honest, they ebb and flow, right? There are times in which they're better and times in which they're, less amazing. But there's a commitment to do them and do our best.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, the cherry pistachio bars, I'm really glad those are not in the bucket of things outside of your mission because they're really, really good. So I'm glad I can still get those since you mentioned them. What are you doing in terms of marketing other than showing up, being a good person, being connected to the community, and doing all these things for customer retention and connection?
Yeah, I mean, marketing for us is a multi-pronged, multifaceted world, and the gold standard is to try and understand cause and effect, and we don't have that any better than anybody else. We certainly exist in the digital world. We certainly exist and have a racing team with sponsored athletes, some of whom are Olympic medalists, and blah blah. But again, maybe just a belief that I have. The world is so digital, and here we are, communicating and connecting digitally, and even though there's value in that, and even though it's nice, I don't know, we're also making a bet that those in-person interactions and those in-person experiences matter. And so we do a lot of event marketing. We did open and run a restaurant here in Boulder. And that's not easy, and it's certainly not in our core capabilities if you want to use, business jargon. But it also allows us to connect with tens of thousands of people, many of whom, but not all, are our core customer. And again, the bet we're making is that when they have that interaction, when they have that experience with the food that we make for them, or also hopefully the conversation they have with one of our staff there about whatever it may be, et cetera, that creates an emotional connection, right? And the next time they're at REI looking at this wall of products, or even crazier on Amazon, where there's a new product, every 3 hours. They may not be swayed, right, by the latest, greatest discount or fancy marketing or whatever else it might be. And they remember, you know, us as real people in a real company, doing our best day in and day out.
Yeah. That decision, so for those of you who don't live in Boulder, Colorado, it has become Pearl Street, the Pearl Street Mall. This is just my opinion, which used to have lots of different kinds of stores and lots of restaurants. It still has some restaurants, but mostly what it's become, it is the outdoor retailer mall on a real street. Like any outdoor or athletic brand you want, you can find an outlet, not an outlet, a flagship store on the street, which is mind-boggling, actually. So it's interesting because it is quite a good intersection with your audience. But yeah, when I have to say, I mean, when I walked by that, first of all, I was so excited. I just thought it was so cool and fun. But I was surprised about it as a business decision, knowing you. Was that a tough decision?
Um, you know, when you ask if it's a tough decision, I actually would say no. We made a decision and ran with it.
Yeah.
Um, it's been, and committed to it, right? Not blindly. At some point, you have to have some stage gates and know when to pull the plug. But it's been a lot of learning. It certainly has been hard. And I think, like so many things in business, right? It took longer, it cost more than we ever would have expected. And that's real. At the same time, I would say too that anecdotally, the impact of it has also exceeded what we expected. And how you reconcile those two things and which one comes out on top, I don't know. We're still running it, so that's our belief or our answer. But it can be hard. It can be hard to compare, apples and kumquats together at certain times.
Yeah, sure. What's more interesting to you, or what's one or two things that you're most interested in about this business 14 years in?
Um, what comes to mind is that I think consumers and society has changed a little bit. And again, we are in this a similar bubble. But I think before, I don't know when that was, people really defined themselves as something. I am a skier, I am a cyclist, I am a rock climber, and they sort of put their world into it, right? Now, in other parts of the country, maybe it was more defined around work or what college you went to or whatever else, but still there's sort of like singular definition. And without a doubt, I think what we've seen is that people are looking to be more than that. They're looking to blend things together. And in some ways, I think that has probably lowered the ceiling, and not in a bad way. But they do multiple things. And I think something that we've seen that I'm really proud about is that we've been able to help people who previously might have felt like they could never approach running an ultra marathon, or they could never approach even trying to get after a 10K because they were so intimidated by even the fueling nutrition side. And that we've been able to bring an actionable, understandable approach to people to help bring them into these communities that often have been very exclusive. And that makes me excited because I think big picture, that feeds back to all of these challenges that, we have in society with aging and the difference between health span and lifespan, the confusion around nutrition, again, yada yada, right? We could go on and on, but gosh, it's really fun to be a small part of that. Um, I think the other piece, which is almost the exact opposite, um, there's a performance element of truly elite endurance sports where we have, and I believe will continue to change the paradigm and change those worlds. The amount and way people are fueling in these endurance sports is completely different than it was 20 years ago. And people are setting records, whether it's for power or courses, without performance enhancing drugs compared to a time when that's what was prevalent. And they're doing that through improved carbohydrate fueling. And it's amazing to be part of that. It's amazing to work with these athletes for whom excellence is the standard. Um, I don't know. That's just it's cool. I believe in excellence. I believe um, that it's worth chasing after, even if that finish line may feel a little empty when you get there.
What's one thing, this is the last question. My story about you is that you spend a decent amount of time in self-reflection, introspection, and all that kind of thing. And what you just shared is sort of in part an element of that, but I'd love for you to make it even more personal. Like, what's one thing you're learning about yourself these days as a person, as the head of a business, as a channeler of excellence for others in sports?
I'm not sure that I can explain this super well, and certainly I'm like a little scared to do so, which I think is a good sign of it's got value. Um, I think that as I have felt less and less like an imposter,
Mm.
and my own confidence has grown, I feel less and less the need to sort of establish credibility. And in doing so, I think that when I enter communities, whether that's the dinner table, whether that's talking, with other parents when I'm picking my daughter up from school, wherever it may be, you can bring like a listen first approach. And I have been continuously excited at people who I think the previous version of me, and this is where I am ashamed, like would have written somebody off as not good enough, that you find those nuggets where you're like, holy crap, like I really can learn something from this person. This person really does have something that I don't have. Um, and I'm genuinely excited about that. It certainly makes living exciting, right? And thinking about what the coming decades might bring.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, in the old version of you before, whenever it was that was the before,
Yeah.
what was the most common thing you were measuring people for in terms of whether they were worth listening to or not?
Yeah, I think I just judge people as we do, right? As our brains are wired to do. But I think for me it was like sort of God, this I don't like saying this, but like, are you worth knowing and are you worth engaging with? I.e., can I learn from you? Can I get something from you? Are you gonna be willing to wax philosophic with me, right? And so much of that is predicated on these assumptions that aren't real, right? Again, back to sort of like let's go East Coast style, like what school did you go to or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, the Colorado version of that is like, well, what do you do on the weekends? And people are like, well, are you good enough skier for me to be friends with you? And
Yeah.
I,
Right.
I, I don't
Right.
know,
Right.
right? I mean, the same thing plays out, right? So the pattern is just has a different foundation. Um, and yeah, who I learned this from the best actually is my wife, who's the exact opposite of me in many ways. And I think for a long time in a relationship, like I felt annoyed by it, and instead I've realized like it's actually a place where I've had a blind spot, and
Yeah.
had a chance to get better.
Yeah, that's really nice. I want to share something with you. I've been reading this book. I don't remember the title. We'll put it in the show notes, but it's The Moth, the radio show and these events. The Moth is a
Oh yeah, yeah.
storytelling brand. Yeah. So it's the Moth book on storytelling. And I think I used to like until 3 days ago, I used to have this story that if people weren't willing to go deep, then I didn't want to engage. Like it just wasn't,
Mm,
people were just going to just tell me fact after fact about their last trip to Paris. I was like, I am so not down for that. And what this book has helped me understand is that eh, it's still judgy. So I do need to work on that. I need to talk to your wife. But what I'm really after is like richness. It doesn't actually need to be depth. Like,
mm,
what was your most formative memory in sixth grade? It doesn't need to be that. It just means to me like someone sharing something rich. This happened and the effect it had on me was this. And yeah, I think
yeah, yeah. That resonates. That
yeah,
resonates.
well, you do it. You do it.
Yeah.
So I
Huh.
almost think it doesn't matter like how fast somebody is or where they went to school. Like if they can tell you a rich story about almost anything and how it changed them, like that's fascinating
Yeah.
almost always. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you
random
for sharing.
nugget,
I like that.
random nugget from
Yeah.
the interviewer. Uh, Ian, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. For everyone out there, thank you for coming back to the HeySue podcast. You've heard from Ian MacGregor. He is the co-founder and CEO of Skratch Labs. That's SKRATCH labs.com. You will find it in REI, Whole Foods, and Direct, and lots of other sports-related businesses and small businesses especially, which I'm sure Ian loves as I do. So thanks for joining us. Come back again to hear another tale from a founder, a sales leader, or an amazing CEO. Thanks for being with us and on YouTube as well. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.